way I became acquainted with this whole exotic idea of transhumanism, I was doing research, actually. I was a writer and doing research for one of the largest U.S. newspapers out of Oklahoma. And this is maybe 20-some years ago. And doing research on the history of Halloween, of all things, and somewhere I came across a term that I had never seen before called transgenics. Now, I didn't know what transgenics was, but I could kind of put two and two together. Trans, genes, that somehow we're talking here about genetic engineering, the altering of genes. And I became fascinated with this idea because back then the science was brand new. It was not, biotechnology, nanotechnology. These were not even terms that existed, but it was following on the heels of the mapping of the human genome, which then was giving both the birth to a promise and also to the sciences that we are going to be able to do things with genetics. We'll be able to heal our bodies. We'll be able to make ourselves stronger. There was a great deal of promise that was emerging quickly, and the science to back it up, at least in theory. And so I started doing research into transgenics, and at the time it wasn't very easy to get information. The internet was brand new. Certainly the science wasn't old enough for there to be much, that had been published in peer-reviewed journals. And I wanted to know what is the good and what is the bad, and what is transgenics. And I came to understand that transgenics was simply the crossing over of species barriers. This could be done at the level of just organisms. This could be done all the way up to the level of sentient beings, that you could literally blend one kind of a creature with another creature. Why would we want to do that? What would be the purpose behind it? That was what motivated me. And quickly I began to realize that both the military and also the pharmaceutical industry both had an interest in transgenics. The military because they thought they might be able to create exotic new forms of materials that could be used. For instance, one of the first successes was a project that was funded by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, in which they created transgenic goat spiders, actually spider goats. And the reason that they did this was because they knew that spider silk is amazingly resilient, lightweight, but very strong. And yet it's not very easy, to create a spider farm where you can milk spiders for their silk. But they knew that they could do this with goats. And so that one of the first successes in transgenics was creating a goat which was part spider. It could actually grow spider silk in its milk. And then they could use this for making lightweight bulletproof vests. They could use it for creating cargo nets. But since that time until now, as we may discover later on in this discussion, it has become far more sophisticated in terms of the military's interest and the amount of dollars that are flowing into research that grew out of those early forms of transgenic science. On the other side of transgenics, which is probably the biggest part of where the funding is coming from today, is in the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceuticals, why? Because the industry often has to labor with the FDA to try to get permission to do testing of new drug therapies on human subjects. It's very daunting, that task, to try to get a promising new remedy potentially for some kind of debilitating disease, and then to be able to take and start trying that medicine, which is unproven on human test subjects, is not easy to do. Well, the pharmaceutical industry saw right away that they would be able to take animals and put human DNA into the animals, create a human-animal chimera, and then they could work around this problem with getting permission from federal agencies to do human experimentation, and now they could test new drugs in human-animal chimeras to see how the human elements of that creature might respond in a way that they're hoping for with these drug therapies. That too has also grown a great deal since those original transgenic experiments, in that now, of course, what the public most usually hears about is human-animal chimeras that are being created for the purposes of developing stem cell lines, and then the stem cell lines can be used for testing new therapies in hopes that we're going to lead to cures for a variety of human diseases and ailments. Anyway, it was the discovery of transgenics and my interest in why we would have an interest in funding research into crossing over species barriers that then led me to discover that behind these emerging fields of science was a new cultural movement called transhumanism. And transhumanists are made up today really of all walks of life, everything from college kids to old hippies to academics and professionals. It has become a cultural movement, and it's quickly growing. It's international. Today there's a Christian Transhumanist Association, there's a Buddhist Transhumanist Association, there's a Muslim Transhumanist, there's a Mormon Transhumanist, and then there's just a Transhumanist Association. And for whatever reason, I've had the privilege of somehow becoming connected with some of the leading figures in the world in this area. In fact, Dr. James Hughes, who was the president of the World Transhumanist Association, when he was still the head of the WTA, contacted me and asked if I would come on his syndicated television or his syndicated radio show, which is called Change Surfer Radio. Dr. Hughes is a bioethicist. He teaches at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. He's a sociologist. He was and is really the man, the top shelf, if you will. So I agreed to do his show. And I went on his show, and not very well prepared either, but to debate the ethics of crossing over species in barriers in ways that are completely unnatural. And why would we want to do that? Now, of course, as a Christian, and I would probably still consider myself a conservative Christian, I believe in a divine order. In other words, I believe that God was at the beginning of creation, and God, for whatever reasons, placed barriers between the species and ordered that each kind would only reproduce after its own kind. So in the back of my mind, of course, I want to know, what does God know that we don't know? Why did he do that? But then I would say that even if you didn't believe in divine creation, if you are an evolutionist, what we are doing now was not allowed for by evolution either. Natural selection has not done what we are now doing. And so for me, it was a cause for alarm that, you know, they talk about throwing off the balance of nature. We were talking about doing it in ways that a former generation could not have even imagined. So today, the World Transhumanist Association had an original cause. It was really to bring international attention to the idea that through emerging fields of science, we would soon be able to alter what it means to be a human, literally rewrite our DNA, alter ourselves by altering our genetic makeup, create humans, Homo sapiens 2.0. The movement today is often called H+, which just simply means humans plus. A transhuman is in a transitionary state of being. They are human. They are wanting to transition into something else, but ultimately they want to become a post-human, something that has become so radically altered from what we are today as to no longer even be considered to be human. And they imagine creating Homo sapien 2.0 through the use of technology, from neuropharmacology to nanotechnology, genetic engineering, stem cell sciences, robotic assistance, brain-machine interfacing, all of the new fields of science that could have an application for human enhancement is important to the transhumanist movement. Now, the World Transhumanist Association had an original goal of bringing international attention to the movement, and there was a point at which they believed that they had succeeded at doing that. And so they dropped the World Transhumanist Association name and changed it to the IEET, the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technology. Dr. Hughes is also now the CEO or the president of the IEET, and most of the most well-known names in the world that are also involved in transhumanism, such as Nick Bostrom of Oxford University, are chairs or members of the IEET. So somehow, I never set out to somehow become involved as the nemesis, if you will, of the transhumanist movement, and I've actually became friends with people like Dr. Hughes. He has since been on my radio show. We recently did a series where we were talking about the question, are we alone in the universe, which was raised by the Royal Academy of Scientists out of the UK. And we had him come on and he talked about, future space travel from a transhumanist point of view and how our bodies could be enhanced to make us more adaptable to zero gravity states and things like that. So, but the movement is very serious and it's being taken very serious in the world today, from academia to university studies, and you'll be surprised to find out the amount of revenue literally in the tens of millions to the billions of dollars that are flowing into this futuristic dream of transhumanism now and the adaptation of various fields of science, which will be used in the very near future to alter what it means to be a human. The science is being developed now according to the world's best and government experts. It's being tested in laboratory settings and is slowly being adapted so that it can be used as a tool for actually altering what it means to be a human. With regards to who would be funding, who has an interest, that's where it begins to become really surprising and that actually is not too difficult to verify even from secular but reputable news sources. For instance, if you were to go to Google today and type in transhumanism, you would find something like 250,000 web pages now around the world that are dedicated to both the study, philosophy, but this new worldview called transhumanism. However, if you were to type in genetic engineering laboratories, you'd find more than 24 million websites in the world now dedicated to the subject of genetic engineering, which is, of course, one of the sciences that the transhumanists aspire to believe that this is going to be used to alter what it means to be a human. Now, on the ground, what does it mean? Here in the United States of America, you may remember where a few years ago, 2006, I believe, George W. Bush, in a State of the Union address, called for legislation to be enacted that would prohibit the creation of human-animal chimeras. And he wasn't just talking about embryos for experimentation, because he also talked about prohibiting the creation of exotic human life forms that could be patented. Why would the President of the United States, in a speech of record, be calling for legislation that would prohibit this technology? It's because it's emerging very quickly. And we know now that there are those rogue scientist wannabes, the Dr. Moreaus, who are already raising these to full maturity. And we can come to some of those admissions in this interview as well. For example, one of the first things that President Obama did at the executive level, as soon as he became president, he overturned restrictions that had been put in place by President Bush, which would have prohibited federal dollars, American taxpayer money, flowing in to pay for experiments to be done on human-animal chimeras and other forms of science such as stem cell sciences, which is also important to the transhumanist movement. But what most of the public doesn't realize, when we're talking about stem cell sciences, we're almost always talking about the creation of a human-animal chimera from which those stem cells are being derived. But now tax dollars in the United States from the federal level are flowing into thousands of laboratories. In the state that I live in Missouri, for instance, there is a farm that is raising transgenic pigs that are part human. They're using these pigs to actually grow organs in a test in the hopes that these humanized organs in the pigs can then be transplanted into people who are on donor waiting lists. Now, you know, years ago they called this xenotransplantation, and they had hoped to just implant entire pig organs inside humans, but the human bodies in the tests kept wanting to reject these pig organs. Now, though, with human DNA actually growing inside of a pig, we may be able to create an organ that can solve this problem of organ donation. But that kind of funding from the federal level now is flowing into states in a way that had been prohibited under the Bush administration. But it goes deeper. In 2006, a fantastic thing happened. The Department of Health, which is the largest department in the United States of America, which funds research into health issues, provided $773,000 to Case Law School in Cleveland, Ohio, for one reason: to develop over a 24-month period the guidelines that will be used, according to their own press release at Case Law School, used for creating policy for human enhancement regarding the next step